Before this video begins, I would like to give a quick thank you to my Asbantium level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Hello again and welcome back to my Doctor Who lore series, where I go through every modern episode of the show and pick out something to make a bit of a deep dive video about, to explore the wider lore of the show and see just how much expanded media can flesh things out. This time I'm going to be taking a look at the episode The End of the World. This episode was designed to be an impressive showcase of the modern era CGI and effects work, so the production team filled it with lots of interesting and colourful aliens. So naturally I wanted to go through all of these aliens and creatures because a lot of them have actually been given proper backstories, and some of their stories are very wild. So without further ado, this is the story of every alien from the end of the world. And naturally beware spoilers for the stories on screen now. You have been warned.
If you're on board, we'd better start. Enjoy.
So first of all, let's start off with the very first alien we see in the episode, the Steward, who was the manager of the station and had also hosted events on platforms 3, 6 and 15 as well, although we don't know anything about those other platforms. According to the reference book Monsters and Villains, which I'll be referring to a lot in this video, Platform 1 is a sprawling 3-mile wide space station, so it's safe to say that the Steward had a lot to keep track of. There's no real information or backstory regarding the Steward himself, but the comic The Whole Thing's Bananas gives these blue people the species name Crispallion. Crispallions were from the planet Crispallion, which isn't actually a planet, it's instead part of the Jagged Brocade, which is a conglomerate of planets, although we don't know anything about the location or its culture. The staff of Platform 1 were also Crispallions, like Raffalo the plumber killed by the metal spiders, but more interestingly, The Whole Thing's Bananas specifically names Dorian Maldavar as a Crispallion, despite him not having those same facial markings as the ones on Platform 1. Dorian Maldavar will get his own video when I get to series 5 or 6, but he was basically a black market dealer who reluctantly helped the War Doctor destroy the Villain Guard weapons factories by turning them into palm trees instead. But like I said, Dorian will get his own video eventually. There are other blue aliens in the show, specifically in series 10, but as far as I know, these aren't actually named as being Crispallions in any media, so it's still up in the air about whether they are or not. Next up, we have the Forest of Cheam, who actually have a lot of interesting lore around them. Naturally, as we see in the episode, they're big, walking, talking trees, but in Monsters and Villains, Russell T Davies gives them a really detailed biography about their origins. According to this, their origins go all the way back to what's called the Middle Blue period of planet Earth. But in the 5th calendar year of 111222/9967, which rolls off the tongue, Earth had a lot of debts, so illegally auctioned off an area of land across the equator around 500 miles long and 3 miles wide. According to this biography, Brazil and all 5 billion occupants were sold to the brutal deathsmiths of Goth, who experimented on the Brazilians in bizarre and terrible ways. However, the equatorial patch was a lot luckier, being brought by the Brothers of Haim. This wise and wonderful brotherhood were descendants of the Haldons, who were legendary genetic experts. The Brothers of Haim were dedicated to enhancing the universe with new forms of life, so they isolated the equatorial patch on the Pan-Jurassic asteroid field. It was cultivated, fostered, nurtured, and its evolution accelerated to compress 1 billion years of evolution into just 300. The biography reads, first, the rainforest achieved a level 3 sentience. Within 2 generations, the first tree forms were beginning to take shape, moulded in the bark with arms reaching from the treetops. It is written that the wind in the branches became a single harmonious voice. 20 years later, the tree forms developed the ability to walk, and then further developed language, communication, and compassion.
The gift of peace. I bring you a cutting of my grandfather.
200 years after the experiments had begun, the forest named itself as Cheam after its word for water. It existed as a separate theocracy on the groves of the asteroid field, growing and maturing to the extent it actively resented being controlled by the Brotherhood, who were always just kind of sitting there like... There were some minor skirmishes as the forest tried to assert its own evolutionary rights, demanding an end to these experiments by the Brotherhood, who said yes. Yeah, the Brotherhood had already learned from previous mistakes in genetic acceleration, so they just gave the forest complete independence. I guess they didn't want any drama. It's after this that the book describes the forest history as taking a shadowy turn, the stuff of mythology. Davis writes, it is said that, as one, every treeform heard the Great Calling. Every member of the race got into their bank ships and left the asteroid field in a single night, travelling to the far edges of the universe and disappearing from history. Again, to quote the book, what they saw there, what they learned, is never spoke of. Some say the forest met God, some say the forest killed God, some say the forest is God, but no treeform will ever discussed the Great Calling, its origin, or its consequences. So yeah, they probably saw some absolute cosmic horror insanity while they were out in the depths of space for 5,000 years. Indeed, when they came back, they had what the book describes as a wisdom and grace unparalleled in fit 5 civilizations, and were treated with reverence wherever they went. Somehow during this absence, the Forest of Cheam had become a higher species, and were even able to observe the Time War, weeping as they looked on at the mighty war because they were horrified by all the bloodshed. By the time we see the Forest of Cheam in the End of the World, their roots had spread throughout the universe, with the tree forms living on a planet named Cheam and New Earth, where they were initially hunted by the termitons, a termite-like race indigenous to the New Forest. Or would that be the New Forest? Anyway, these 8-foot-tall termitons were eventually stopped by the New Earth Senate, and the treeforms were able to live a much quieter life, with specific members like Xylem Mapledorm, who was a spiritual leader, and Sapling Vale, who was a cutting of Jabe Keth Jaff, who had been on Platform 1. Monsters and Villains describe the Platform 1 Forest of Cheam as being selected from the forest's younger branches, out of the Caven Hole Arboretum. Jabe was joined by Coffer and Loot, with the trio attending the End of the World party due to the wealth of the Forest of Cheam, wanting to keep their share prices up because they were absolutely stinking rich due to all the land they owned, although they did actually genuinely want to pay their respects to their roots. And yes, pun absolutely intended. And now we get to one of my favourite little creatures from the episode, the Mox of Balhoun, who represented the solicitors Jolko and Jolko. The Mox was a Balhounian from the planet Balhoun, which was part of the Galactic Federation, a huge political entity which succeeded the Earth Empire as the galaxy's dominant faction, including planets like Peladon, Earth, Mars, Draconia, Thoros Beta, and Zygor, along with many others. According to Monsters of Villains, the Mox of Balhoun was part of the Rak Fen Jakaviti Rab Mol Fel Mol Tacit conglomerate. Yeah, it just rolls right off the tongue. This was part of the Hanamakat Pel Jadrabone, part associated with the Rakasine Hoblamete, but independent of the Rock Math Pateen 6. I hate you sometimes, Russell. The book also provides the genetic code registration 5.6.9.222.0 and advises that in an emergency, if his bodily fluids are not replaced by the chair's internal filter every 25 minutes, then the Mox has been known to sweat galactic acid. Apparently it's a bad idea to touch him if he does this. The entry also says that the Mox's favourite song is Yap Cap Forward Bigger Tomb Tomb Tomb. Man, that's a banger, always loved it. Of course, the Mox ends up a little bit crispy during the events of the episode, but there are two more Balhounians we know of. I'll get to Elth towards the end, but Big Finish's Classic Doctor's New Monsters 3 introduced the Hox of Balhoun, the well-meaning brother of the Mox, who the Third Doctor and Sarah Jane meet in a reconstructed Earth house set up as a preservation effort, because of the actual Earth being destroyed. Despite him being obsessed with collecting Earth stuff and Earth culture, you know, he's a bit of an Earthaboo, the Hox basically has no idea of humanity or human history, kind of like Mr. Copper with all those misconceptions, which is quite fun.
Where did you get all this from?
Well, I have a first-class degree in earthonomics.
So we've had some nice lore and expanded backstories, but now it's time to skim through the ones with less substance. Obviously we have the adherents of the repeated meme, who are apparently from Financial Family 7 and recite their meme at 30-minute intervals, although they didn't actually exist and were just part of Cassandra's plan. Next are the brothers Hop Pyleen, who were two very rich reptilian brothers who lived on the cliff tops of Rex Vox Jax when they were growing up and liked to wear fur coats to keep their cold-blooded reptile bodies warm. They became notable for developing the Hypo-Slip travel system, a starship engine that made them rich and famous. According to the Battles in Time comic Death Race 5 Billion, this engine was used in the racing pod H500, also known as the Hypo-Slip 500 Lightspeed Podule. On its debut race, this pod was stolen by its pilot Skip Pyleen, who was planning on selling the pod's secret technology to the Racanoids, a race of galactic techno-thieves, but was stopped by the 10th Doctor. Our next alien is Cal Sparkplug, who doesn't really get much of an introduction in the episode, but Monsters and Villains names him as Cal McNanovich, a cybernetic hyperstar who attends the event incognito with his partner Noxwen Van Koofen, both beings wearing giant hooded cloaks and cybernetic face masks, providing them with special air. Not much is known about these two, we don't even have like a species name or a home planet, but according to Art of Destruction, Cal Sparkplug played James Bond at one point in one of his hyperfilms, with the 10th Doctor singling him out as his favourite version of the iconic spy. I'm sure he did a great job, you know, he just fits right in there with Connery, Brosnan and more. You know, you have those and then you have Cal Sparkplug. Wouldn't even know that they're different species.
I have no objections.
Not much is known about the bird-like Mr. and Mrs. Pacu, but we do know that this is the name of their species, and there was a president named Kakar, along with Pacu huntmasters who, well, carried out hunts. I know, shocking. Also, in the background of the episode are the ambassadors from the city-state of the Binding Light. They're humanoid creatures with pointy ears and multiple eyes. Nothing is really known about this species apart from them having oxygen sensitivity, and another member of the species did appear in the background of the Rings of Akaton. Similarly, there isn't much information about the 4 scholars of the University of Rago 56 Rago, who are the wicker basket looking guys. According to TARDIS Wiki, they're tended because of their 27 A++ scores in Class 55 at the university, but I can't find any source for this, so I don't even know if it's true. But we do know that one of them died from the heat of the sun as it destroyed the Earth. Lastly, just for completion's sake, I'll mention the robotic spider creatures, although they haven't had any appearances outside of End of the World and New Earth, so there's nothing really to say about them. But the same cannot be said for our next 2 guests.
Please welcome the Face of Bo.
The sponsor of the Platform 1 party was the Face of Bo, who apparently organised the whole thing and invited everyone. The episode says Bo is from the Silver Devastation, which the Game of Death describes as being an area in deep space where 2 galaxies collided over 1 billion years ago. This caused a stellar collapse, which is what the Silver Devastation is, simply a vast sector of space filled with nothing but dead stars and dark matter, named for its visual resemblance to a huge silver sea hanging in space. It's an area shrouded in mystery and myth, fascinating space travellers throughout the history of the universe. It's the subject of endless speculation, with some people claiming it's home to mutant survivors of the 2 galaxies, or refugees from the old time caught in eternal conflict. Some believe that there are blood-sucking monsters from another universe, and others suggest it's simply an empty void. Not much is known about the Silver Devastation at all, but this is supposedly the place where the giant head Bo kind come from, although we've only ever seen the one Bo. Monsters and Villains contains a bio for the Face of Bo, furthering the legendary and mysterious origin of the creature. It claims that there's evidence of him being present when the stars of the Andromeda Galaxy were still nothing but dust. The entry speculates that Bo's longevity is by will alone or mistake, even claiming that the planets of Kep Calason refer to him as the creature that God forgot. Bo had 6 children during the 4th Great and Bountiful Human Empire, 3 sons and 3 daughters including Bo Mina. However, apparently all of these offspring had a natural lifespan of just 40 years, with Bo himself outliving them, leaving him as the last of his kind by the time he died in the year 5,023,000,023. The Face of Bo could communicate telepathically, and he was kept inside a life support tank pumping in gases to keep him alive. He was one of the oldest beings in the universe, because according to showrunner Russell T Davies, he was none other than Captain Jack Harkness himself, who had been rendered immortal by the Bad Wolf entity during the Dalek invasion of the game station. According to Jack, when he was growing up, the Face of Bo was a nickname he had due to his home being the Beauchene Peninsula, so his familiarity of the Doctor in New Earth and Gridlock makes a lot of sense, along with Bo's dying message. I've never been shy of my own personal rejection of this, but it was the intent of Russell T Davies, so yeah, I guess I have to go along with it. Just please don't get mad at me again.
The lady, Cassandra O'Brien, Delta 17.
And lastly, we have the bitchy trampoline herself, Lady Cassandra O'Brien Delta 17, who considered herself the last pure human, with a Texan father and a mother from the Arctic desert. When we meet Cassandra in the episode, she's 708 operations into her painfully extended life, and is horrendously vain to the extent of having any wrinkles cut out with a scalpel. But according to Monsters and Villains, her earlier life was a lot different. The book claims that Cassandra was born into the ruins of the Warsaw Apology in the old calendar year of 4.99/4763/A/15, but not much is known of her early years. The in-universe biography says Cassandra was actually born a male by the name of Brian Edward Cobbs, who became a security guard at Climb Enterprises in the year A/32. 2 years later, a Miss B.E. Cobbs had married Harry Climb, the billionaire owner of the company, who 6 months later mysteriously fell on his own garden rake 6 times and died. Such a tragic accident. The newly widowed Mrs. Cobbs Climb inherited the empire, but quickly cashed in on her stocks and fled when the police called in a rake expert. From here, she seemingly travelled to the Linladen Bordello on the lawless border world of Rit. The book claims that in the OC year A/60, a thumbprint matching Mrs. Cobbs Climb was found on the body of a murdered punter, with the Bordello's Madam Kitty Gillespie mysteriously vanishing that night and leaving for Saints World. You know, I'm sure it's just a coincidence. 20 years later, on Saints World, there was finally the first record of a woman going by the name of Cassandra, Oh, and yeah, by the way, you know the lady? Yeah, that's not real. She bought it for 50 KLM at the Instant Royalty Bazaar. Caught you in 4K there, Cassandra. Anyway, there was an actor named Cassandra Hoots who appeared in B-movies such as Mind My Legs and Run Betty Run. She then married the studio boss Ivor Cannonbone, who died soon after because a piano fell on him. Yeah, you've really got to be careful with those falling pianos, it's happening all the time. Mrs. Cassandra Cannonbone then became head of the company, once again widowed under tragic circumstances. However, it was in that same year that the original Brian Cobb suddenly appeared again, starring in the musical biopic Look at Me Laughing. This was critically panned, although soon after 15 of these critics mysteriously died, along with 2 surgeons, and Brian vanished from the record for good. In the OC year B/1, Cannonbone Pictures collapsed, but Cassandra fled the planet and was soon on the arm of the 1,000-year-old Prince Regent Lucius at the 15th Pylomic Games. But then tragedy would strike once more, with a terrible gliding accident taking the lives of the entire Lucius family, leaving poor widowed Princess Cassandra as the only living heir. She's so unlucky, poor woman. Anyway, there's then a gap of God knows how long, with Lady Cassandra going through all these surgeries in a desperate attempt to remain beautiful and famous, even turning to straight out villainy like we see in The End of the World and New Earth, before she finally died in the arms of her past self, having at last come to terms with her own mortality.
He just collapsed. I think he's dying. Someone do something!
And that's it for all the aliens and creatures on board Platform 1 during that fateful day when the Earth died in a big ball of flame. But it didn't actually end there. Earlier I mentioned the Elf of Balhoun, the Mox's brother. Indeed, the Elf believed that the Mox's death was due to the negligence of the other attendees, so he kidnapped them all one by one and planned to kill them and get his revenge. However, he was stopped by the 10th Doctor, and the attendees forgave the Elf and helped him through his grief. So now with that out of the way, we finally reached the end of this video, which again ended up way longer than I expected to be. From blue Crispellions to big heads in jars, Platform 1 played host to all sorts of aliens and creatures, so it's fun to see where some of them came from and where some of them ended up going, despite most of them dying. It's nice to see some of these aliens getting more elaborate histories, because it helps to make the Doctor Who universe feel a lot bigger and more lived in. Now, if you don't mind, I'm off to watch the next Cowl Sparkplug banger, the remake of the 600th century classic Indianapolis Johnston and the Phase Shift of Calamity. What a great movie. So, thanks for watching this lore video, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one when we check out the Cardiff Rift. Bye bye. And a special thank you to my Bantam level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson, my Platinum level patrons Maximilian Foreman and Nick Skames, and all my Gold level patrons Boots, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, Herna Verzog, Robert Hock, and Tom Azar. Thank you so much for your support.